China's military launched a new round of war games near Taiwan on Monday, drawing condemnation from the governments in Taipei and the U.S. Chinese state media reported that China's Coast Guard circled Taiwan and staged rare operations of, quote, law enforcement patrols close to Taiwan's offshore islands. The Chinese military's Eastern Theater Command said the drills were taking place in the Taiwan Strait and 9 areas around the island. The command also said the drills were a, quote, stern warning to the separatist acts of Taiwan Independence Forces and did not say when they would end. Taiwan's Defense Ministry and Coast Guard said Monday that both agencies had dispatched their own forces. Fighter jets were seen taking off and landing at Taiwan's Hsinchu Air Base Monday morning. And Taiwan's Coast Guard released this video said to show one of its ships broadcasting a message asking a Chinese Coast Guard vessel to leave its waters. A Taiwan security source said there were no signs so far of any missile launches. Democratically governed Taiwan, which China views as its own territory, had been on alert for more war games since last week's National Day speech by President Lai Ching-te. Lai's address was condemned by Beijing after he said China had no right to represent Taiwan, even as he offered to cooperate with Beijing. China's Eastern Theater Command released this propaganda video Monday, which showed a cartoon caricature of Lai with pointed ears like a devil. Taiwanese officials said Lai's National Security Council convened on Monday to discuss the situation. The Council's Secretary General, Joseph Wu, said that Taiwan would not escalate the conflict.
We also need to stay calm and confident to prevail in the struggle between democracy and authoritarianism. We will stay moderate and responsible and work hard to maintain the cross-strait status quo to help maintain peace and stability in the region.
A senior Taiwan security official speaking to Reuters on condition of anonymity said they believe China was practicing blockading Taiwanese ports and international shipping lanes, as well as repelling the arrival of foreign forces. In Washington, officials from the administration of U.S. President Joe Biden said there was no justification for the drills and that they were continuing to monitor them.
Displaced Palestinians woke up to their tents on fire in the early hours of Monday after an Israeli airstrike hit Al-Aqsa Hospital in central Gaza. Medics reported several people killed and dozens of others wounded. I swear there's no safety, whether it's a hospital, a school, or any place, this woman said. Nearly 5 days ago, they hit a school, and today they hit the tents. As you see, what can we do? Israel's military said it struck militants operating from a command center inside the compound. It accuses Hamas of using civilian facilities for military purposes, which Hamas denies. The strike came as Israeli forces widened their raid into northern Gaza. Residents said the military had isolated several areas in the far north of the enclave, including Jabalia, Gaza's largest historic refugee camp. As strikes continued, medics were seen rushing wounded Palestinians to Kamal Adwan Hospital in Jabalia on Sunday. The Israeli military said earlier that it had ordered evacuations in areas including Kamal Adwan Hospital. 9 days into a major Israeli operation in northern Gaza, the Hamas-run Gaza government media office said Israeli strikes had killed around 300 Palestinians there. It said Israel's bombardment of civilian houses and displacement shelters was intended to force residents to leave Gaza once and for all, which Israel denies. Palestinian and United Nations officials say there are no safe areas in the enclave. They're also worried about severe shortages of food, fuel, and medical supplies in northern Gaza, saying there's a risk of famine there. An Israeli military statement on Sunday said forces operating throughout the Gaza Strip in the past 24 hours had attacked about 40 targets and killed dozens of militants.
Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris honed in on Donald Trump's recent comments about a, quote, enemy within America at a Monday rally, in what appeared to be a fresh effort to portray him as a threat to democracy.
He's talking about that he considers anyone who doesn't support him or who will not bend to his will an enemy of our country. It's a serious issue. Donald Trump is increasingly unstable and unhinged. And he is out for unchecked power. That's what he's looking for.
Harris was speaking in Pennsylvania Monday night, and so was Trump. It's a battleground state that will be pivotal to the outcome of the election, now just weeks away. Their rallies may offer a shot in the arm for Harris and Trump, as polls show an incredibly tight race between the two candidates that is expected to come down to the results in 7 swing states. Trump, in recent rally speeches, has hinted about facing, quote, an enemy from within, more dangerous than a foreign adversary. And in an interview on Sunday with Fox News, when asked if he was expecting chaos on Election Day, Trump appeared to suggest the military could be deployed against citizens.
We have some very bad people. We have some sick people, radical left lunatics. And I think they're and it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military, because they can't let that happen.
In a rare move for her campaign, Harris played that clip at her Pennsylvania rally on Monday. The Trump campaign did not immediately return Reuters' request for comment. Harris also unveiled new policy proposals aimed at Black men on Monday, including forgivable small business loans and access to a new legal recreational marijuana industry. That comes amid concern by her campaign and Democrats, including former President Barack Obama, that her support from Black male voters is slipping. A September poll by the NAACP showed that over a quarter of young Black men say they would support Trump in the election race. By comparison, President Joe Biden got about 80% of the Black male vote in 2020. Harris may also work to shore up support with male voters more broadly by making an appearance on Joe Rogan's podcast. That's according to a Reuters report Monday night, citing 3 sources with knowledge of the matter. Rogan runs the most popular podcast in the United States and has a highly coveted and devoted following that leans young, male, and numbers in the tens of millions. On Monday, Trump had indicated he plans to go on Rogan's show before Election Day. On Tuesday, Harris is expected to be interviewed by Charlamagne tha God, a comedian and author whose nationally syndicated radio show is popular with Black millennials.
Canada expelled 6 Indian diplomats on Monday and linked them to the murder of a Sikh separatist leader on Canadian soil. India, in turn, ordered the expulsion of 6 Canadian diplomats. Both sides' top diplomats are among those being kicked out. It's a major rupture of diplomatic relations between the two countries at a time when Canada and the US are seeking closer ties with India as a counterweight to China. At a Monday news conference, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said the Royal Canadian Mounted Police were alleging a broader effort to target Indian dissidents in Canada.
They have clear and compelling evidence that agents of the Government of India have engaged in and continue to engage in activities that pose a significant threat to public safety. This includes clandestine information gathering techniques, coercive behavior targeting South Asian Canadians, and involvement in over a dozen threatening and violent acts, including murder.
Trudeau says the Indian government, once told of such activities, didn't cooperate with the RCMP. Canada's Foreign Minister Melanie Joly said they asked India to remove diplomatic immunity of the diplomats so Canadian authorities could question them.
We're not seeking diplomatic confrontation with India, but we will not sit quietly as agents of any country are linked to efforts to threaten, harass, or even kill Canadians.
India rejected Trudeau's comments. It also said it had actually chosen to withdraw its top envoy from Canada, disputing Canada's account, and that it was expelling the Canadian diplomats because it was not confident their safety could be guaranteed. Last year, Trudeau said Canada was pursuing allegations that Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government was behind the fatal shooting of Hardeep Singh Nijjar near Vancouver in 2023. Nijjar was a Canadian Sikh separatist who supported creating a new separate Sikh state in northern India called Khalistan. 2 months later, the US Justice Department charged an Indian national with trying to arrange the murder of another prominent Sikh separatist in New York, at the behest of an unnamed Indian intelligence official. India has denied involvement in both incidents. Since then, Reuters has reported that the FBI and the Canadian Royal Mounted Police privately warned at least 7 Sikh activists in the United States and Canada that their lives could be in grave danger.
The crippling strike at Boeing, now in its 5th week, has prompted an intervention by U.S. Acting Labor Secretary Julie Su. That's according to a source familiar with the matter, who said on Monday that the Biden cabinet member has flown to Seattle in an effort to nudge Boeing executives and the union representing roughly 33,000 striking machinists back to the bargaining table. The Labor Department confirmed her visit. Her intervention comes after the plane maker late Friday made the surprise announcement that it was cutting 17,000 jobs and taking $5 billion in charges. It also made significant production changes, most notably delaying the delivery of its 777X jetliner by 1 year to 2026. The plane, which has undergone certification and testing delays, will now enter service a total of 6 years late. That provoked the ire of at least one major airline executive. Emirates Airline President Tim Clark, who placed an initial order of 150 of the 777X planes, issued a rare written statement regarding the delay. Clark said that Emirates, quote, has had to make significant and highly expensive amendments to our fleet programs as a result of Boeing's multiple contractual shortfalls, and we will be having a serious conversation with them over the next couple of months. He also derided Boeing's new timetable, citing both the strike and certification snafus by adding, quote, I fail to see how Boeing can make any meaningful forecasts of delivery dates. Boeing and the striking union of the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers were not immediately available for comment. Shares of Boeing traded lower on Monday.
It gets really excited when that envelope comes.
To Erica Warbeck of Cecil, Pennsylvania, mail-in voting is more than just her civic duty. It's also a family ritual with her 10-year-old son.
There's no stickers involved, but we still get to vote.
2 months after a primary election in April, she learned her ballot was not counted because she had inadvertently marked her ballot with an incomplete date.
I was pretty surprised by that. My disappointment was more in the fact that if I had known, I would have shown up to the poll and cast a provisional ballot. Right. But there was no notification of that.
Hers was among 259 mail-in ballots in her county that were not recorded because of a ballot error.
I was frustrated with the system. I felt it was un-American in the process. And I felt like my civil liberties were infringed upon. You know, I mean, we live here because we have a right to shape our government. And how could primary results be accurate if so many ballots were not cast?
In July, Warbeck, who prefers to vote by mail because she suffers from an autoimmune disease, joined a growing number of voters who are going to court to ensure they have access to the polls and their ballot is counted in the November 5th presidential election. Their cases are part of the roughly 70 election-related lawsuits filed in 7 battleground states, including Pennsylvania, according to a review of cases on Democracy Docket, a website that tracks election cases. After being approached by the state's branch of the American Civil Liberties Union, Warbeck agreed to join 6 other voters from Washington County, near Pittsburgh, who sued their election board.
It's about transparency. When you go and send in a mail-in ballot, there should be correspondence back to the voter to let them know that not only their ballot was received, but that it was also processed and counted. And if there are errors that would prevent that ballot from being counted, that you are receiving, correspondence that indicates that you had an error on your ballot and gives you opportunity to cast a provisional ballot.
In August, a judge ruled that officials must document if a mail-in or absentee ballot has an error, so voters can mount a challenge or cast a provisional ballot at their polling place. The county election board did not respond to a request for comment.
At this upscale restaurant in the foodie mecca of Sao Paulo, a novel star ingredient is being served: tofu. Despite being the world's top producer of soybeans, Brazilians eat rather little of it, making soy a pricey niche offering. Sushi Mar's owner Maria Chermelli says there's a prejudice against tofu here. That's in part because most of Brazil's soybeans are grown to be exported to Asia and Europe to fatten up livestock. And 98% of it is genetically modified to withstand the heavy use of herbicide. All of that has added to a stigma in the local market. So, most food companies offering tofu and soy milk to choosy Brazilians rely on expensive parallel farming of non-GMO soybeans, or imported products from as far off as Japan.
It's crazy to think that Brazil, as the largest soy producer in the world, is actually also an importer of soy.
Gus Guadagnini is Good Food Institute's Brazil CEO, a think tank studying the development of meat alternatives.
And that's exactly because the soybean produced in Brazil is being used to feed animals, while when we want to buy non-GMO soy protein to be used in the food industry, they have to import from other countries.
That's pushed up the price of soy you do find here in Brazil. Brazilians making minimum wage would need to fork over a full day's pay for just 250 grams of tofu. All the while, Brazil ships over 1 million tons a week of soybeans to China on average. Brazil is forecast to produce a record 170 million metric tons of soybeans in its next harvest, more than the United States. Agriculture consultancy Agromeris found Brazil was the only major market for foods made with soybeans in decline. But back at Sushimar, Chermelli says attitudes towards soy are slowly evolving.
I
think this is changing a lot because there are a lot of people adhering to the vegan diet. And so I think that this prejudice is decreasing more and more. And I think that because of this, there is much better quality tofu today.
Brought more fresh record closing highs for the Dow and S&P 500 and for shares of Nvidia, putting the AI chip leader on the brink of dethroning Apple as the world's most valuable company. The Dow gained about 0.5%, the S&P gained roughly 0.75%, and the Nasdaq climbed nearly 0.9%. An index of semiconductor companies jumped 1.8% to a more than 2-month high, also aided by a nearly 7% gain in shares of ARM Holdings. Mega-cap tech names also jumped, including Alphabet, Microsoft, and Tesla.
Well, what is very interesting is that the trends haven't really changed.
Melissa Brown, managing director of investment decision research at SimCorp, said that despite the start of rate cuts by the Federal Reserve, which should benefit small and mid-cap companies, big tech stocks are still leading the charge.
Stocks that have done well continue to do well. Stocks that have done poorly continue to do poorly. So it's interesting that we haven't really seen a change in trends, even though we did get this big Fed action during the quarter. And I think that is probably because that Fed action was largely anticipated. And so even, going into the quarter or even, going back quite a few months, the expectation was that the Fed would cut rates. The Fed cut rates. So things are just continuing on the same path.
Movers to the downside included Caterpillar, which dropped 2% following a brokerage downgrade. And Boeing fell 1.3% after the plane maker flagged a larger than expected third-quarter loss on Friday. Earnings season heads into full swing this week, with investors also keeping an eye out for crucial economic data, including September retail sales figures.
Ericsson reported earnings and sales above expectations on Tuesday. The Swedish telecoms gear maker said the market is showing signs of improvement. It cited a rebound in demand for 5G equipment in North America as one key driver. A fall in demand from mobile operators there over the last 2 years had hit companies like Ericsson and rival Nokia. The firms had looked for growth in developing markets such as India instead, but that often hurt profits. Ericsson's net sales fell by 4% to just over $5.9 billion, but beat estimates. Sales in North America increased more than a half. They were helped by last year's $14 billion deal to supply gear to AT&T. Revenue in Europe and Latin America was down 2%, while other markets fell in double-digit terms. The Paris Auto Show kicked off Monday with tensions over tariffs on China-made electric vehicles a big focus. The event is the largest car show in Europe and comes at a pivotal time. Struggling European automakers need to prove they can still compete, while Chinese rivals aim to get a foothold in a competitive market. There was some common ground though. Executives from both regions warned about the dangers of EU tariffs. Stella Li is vice president of Chinese EV giant BYD. She said tariffs could stop poorer people buying EVs. Stellantis CEO Carlos Tavares also warned the duties could lead to Chinese automakers setting up plants in Europe. That would add to overcapacity in the region and lead some local manufacturers to close factories. 9 Chinese brands, including BYD and Leapmotor, are due to unveil their latest models at this year's event. 2 years ago, Chinese automakers made up almost half of the brands present. This year, they account for only about a fifth of the brands. It's due to a much stronger showing from Europe's auto industry, a sign of its determination to defend its home turf. Earlier this month, EU member states narrowly backed import duties on Chinese-made EVs of up to 45%, though opinions were split within the bloc. The EU aims to counter what Brussels calls unfair subsidies from Beijing to Chinese manufacturers. Beijing denies unfair competition and has threatened countermeasures. Europe's automakers, meanwhile, have endured a difficult period. German giants Volkswagen, Mercedes-Benz and BMW all issued profit warnings largely because of the weak Chinese market. Stellantis also slashed its earnings forecast because of inventory problems at its US business.
The Tokyo Metro is set to raise $2.3 billion in an upcoming share listing. That's according to Reuters sources. They say the urban rail network has priced its IPO at the top of a planned range. The sources say that comes after the offer was more than 15 times oversubscribed. Investors were reportedly attracted by the prospect of robust dividend payments. Retail investors were among those to prove keen, with the Metro a household name in Japan's capital. Shares available to institutional investors were even more in demand though, oversubscribed by as much as 30 times. There was no comment on the report from the company. Japan's government currently owns a little more than half of the Metro, with the rest owned by Tokyo's city government. The pair are now selling half their shares in the IPO. If it goes ahead as expected, the offering will be Japan's biggest since SoftBank listed its telecoms unit in 2018. The central government plans to use the proceeds to pay back special bonds issued after the country's 2011 earthquake and tsunami. Last month, the Metro company said the listing would take place on October 23rd.
Virgin Australia has recorded its second consecutive annual profit. The airline said Monday it had seen a 6.8% rise in year-on-year revenue. The results put it in a stronger financial position as it looks to pursue an eventual initial public offering. It also comes just 2 weeks after Qatar Airways said it would buy a 25% stake in Australia's number 2 carrier. The airline was bought by US private equity firm Bain Capital after it collapsed into voluntary administration 4 years ago. It returned to profit for the first time in 11 years last year. Virgin Australia did not publish after-tax profit figures, but it reported underlying earnings before interest and tax of $350 million for the financial year ended June 30th. That's up 18.2% over last year's result. In contrast, rival Qantas in August reported a 16% drop in annual underlying earnings before tax. It blamed lower fares, higher spending on customers, and weaker freight revenue.
Was made that Unifiel would currently stay in all its position in spite of the calls that were made by the Israeli Defense Forces to vacate the position that are in the vicinity of the Blue Line.
As President of the Security Council, I have the honor of delivering these remarks on behalf of all 15 members of the UN Security Council. Against the backdrop of ongoing hostilities along the Blue Line, the members of the Security Council expressed their strong concerns after several Unifiel positions came under fire in the past days. Several peacekeepers have been wounded.